So, welcome to this episode of 50agility podcast. And joining me today is a fellow professional Scrum trainer and the person behind Agile Socks consulting company, who is based in United States of America, Stephanie Ockerman. Welcome and nice to have you on board.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Stephanie has got a lot of material out there during consulting and teaching. Your website is swarming with interesting things to read and pick out. And what keeps a listener or reader in there, I guess, is they are all deeply practical. There are very few just pure theory scenes like PowerPoint slide-ish material, but everything is rather interconnected with some practical experience that I assume you've had coaching and consulting.
Well, I really appreciate hearing that because I do love to write and also even in teaching in terms of like small little videos, it's all kind of teaching, right? And the way of writing is something where it's like it challenges me to really think through like how do I convey something in as clear and concise a way as possible, something that's usually a very complex topic where it's like you need to kind of understand some theory to like be able to do it in the real world, but you also need to be able to connect that theory to what it could look like in practice. And so that's just something I really enjoy the challenge of doing. So I'm really happy to hear that that's how you see it and that it's coming across that way.
Yeah, and you have also co-written the Mastering Professional Scrum book from Professional Scrum series. So you have a lot of credibility when it comes to Scrum theory. And hence I had an idea that we make this episode slightly different and we'll try to bust as many very common myths about Scrum that are circulating out there among people who either don't like it or don't understand it good enough, trying to dismantle them and bring a little bit of clarity to the picture, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is the stuff I love to do.
So the first one, which is kind of more intriguing for, let's say, the whole Eastern Europe right now, which has become, with the boom of IT industry during the COVID pandemic, the very fruitful destination of outsourcing companies, where there are primarily some fixed bid or times and materials contracts being signed, that Scrum is not fit for doing those fixed time, fixed scope projects at all. Do you think it's true or not?
Well, so it's interesting. So if the question is Scrum a good fit for trying to control scope, time, and money? No, but neither is waterfall. So there's kind of like a myth behind the myth of, that's out there. I have a background in traditional project management. I am PMP certified through the Project Management Institute. And I've maintained that certification over the years. I'm not somebody who's like, oh, project's bad, all projects bad, and project managers, we don't have a place for them. No, that's not true. There is a difference. And just like how you can do Scrum poorly, you can do project management poorly. And so like, first, I just like to call out kind of the myth behind the myth. But back to the original, kind of point here is, can we have kind of like fixed bid contracts and leverage Scrum? And what I would argue is Scrum is actually one of the best ways to go about delivering and executing on a fixed bid. The thing is, you can't fix all three pieces of that, right? So kind of the iron triangle is traditionally what you'll hear around like trying to fix, you can't fix all three sides. And I learned that actually when I earned my PMP certification. There's a whole lot of nuances to that. And this is something I go a little bit deeper on when I'm working, when I'm in a 2-day class, as well as when I'm, working longer term with clients in terms of helping them understand. But that's just the basics of it. What Scrum allows us to do, like the reason I'm like Scrum is a perfect fit, is what you can do is you can say, we are willing to spend an amount of money and we have a goal in mind. And the scope itself, we're going to be reasonably flexible on that, because what we actually care about is the value. We care about the outcomes. And we want the flexibility because it's complex work, it's unpredictable. And what Scrum allows you to do is essentially, one way to do a fixed bid would be to fund a certain number of sprints. And, we say, hey, look, every sprint, we are going to show you done product, and we're going to get feedback. We're, the potential to even like be releasing this into the market early, even if it's maybe not the real market, whatever your industry is. Maybe it's, not literally released to end users, and but it is something you can touch, you can feel, you can get tangible feedback on, or more meaningful feedback. And so, that would be the perfect fit for Scrum, is to say, like, we can't know exactly how much time and money it's going to take to build, this list of 20 scope items. But instead, what we can say is, we're going to always make sure we're focusing on value. We're going to be transparent about our progress, and then give you the flexibility, client, to change direction every sprint based on what you're seeing and based on what's changing around you. Because our assumptions aren't always valid. And by leveraging a framework like Scrum and delivering in that way with transparency, it's creating, I would say, a better relationship between, client and vendor. It can get more challenging, of course, than that. But that's kind of like the first way to kind of bust that myth around, Scrum can't be a fit. Now, if you're going to try to not leverage Scrum the way Scrum is designed and try to break all the rules of Scrum, then of course it's not a great fit. But that's true of anything.
But then what would you say about two concerns that normally people consider projects to be successful when they are delivered on time, within budget, and up to the full scope, right? And here you're saying that we are going to be, changing that towards adjusting the scope when it comes to one of the three things not affixed. And the second bit is, there is a belief, or very empirically valid thing, as called start with Scrum, when people that have been, let's say, doing traditional development with traditional project management will not be capable of creating a done and potentially releasable increment within one sprint, when they have been doing it within 1 year for the previous 10 years of their life. What would you say to those people arguing with those things?
Yeah, so the first point being, but the traditional measures of success tell us. It's like, well, I ask this a lot. I say, well, have you ever delivered a project that checked all those boxes, that was delivered on time, on budget, and checked off all the boxes of the scope that was desired, and was not considered a success? And I've yet to have somebody, that's like been out in the world working, say, oh, well, sure, like we always, like, yes, everything's a success when we hit those three things. Like, we've all worked in areas where we checked those boxes, and then you realized this isn't actually going to meet the need. I've literally had like people not adopt a product, like we build a product and people didn't use it. Or it's kind of one of those, like, yeah, we did it, but we left a whole bunch of dead bodies because, the way we did it was a whole lot of like jumping through hoops and paperwork to change control, and like we play a lot of these games and from an administrative perspective to make it appear. And so I love what you're bringing up, though, is we do have to change our measures of success. And that's not to say that budget and time and scope never matter, right? Like, budget and time are always going to matter to some degree. And I would say scope, it depends, like, it depends on the circumstances. I tend to focus more on outcomes, like, customer value, those types of things. And scope is a way is kind of a means to that end. But, we also know we don't want to fix everything up front. We want flexibility. So, just kind of that's something I think we need to question is, our traditional measures of success, are those leading us down the wrong path? And actually not just leading us down the wrong path, but making us miss the opportunities, right, that are actually available to us if we are focusing on value. if we are actually validating the assumptions we're making about value, if we're frequently kind of assessing like, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Are we learning anything that we should incorporate into our plan? And maybe like pivot or maybe add in something we didn't realize was needed because, hey, there's new information that we're seeing or the market changed. So yeah, like those traditional measures of success, we need to challenge those assumptions. Not to say they don't matter at all, but they're certainly not going to guarantee success, is the reality. All right, so the second part of that question being around, should we just start Scrum, knowing that we've always worked in a different way, and how do we get to a done increment? Is that really the question? Like, should we just start doing it?
Yeah, essentially. So if we decide to leverage the benefits of Scrum framework when kicking off a new project or initiative, and people who are going to be doing the work aren't used to frequent incremental iterative deliveries with adjustments along the way, when you have basically to teach the old dogs the new tricks.
Yeah, so it's always a challenging question, how do we get started? And so I do think it's fair to look at your environment and ask yourself, do we think we can be successful with this? And, I am a huge advocate of giving people the knowledge and skills they need, like that baseline level of knowledge and skills they need to be successful. Get everybody trained. Like the people who are going to actually be using Scrum, we all need to be on the same page. Because if we are really shifting the way we work, but we aren't all on the same page regarding like, what does it mean to, why are we working in this way? And like, why do these rules exist, right? Like why does Scrum say, we have these time boxes, or why are these accountabilities the way they are? If we don't really understand that, it's going to be really easy to like just take our old way of working and then sort of like slap it inside a sprint and like go through the motions without really realizing any of the intentionality behind why Scrum is what it is. And so then the other risk is, or we just look at, hey, I read this online and it says this is what Scrum is, and we go do it, and it's like, but that's not really what Scrum is. That is just, maybe an organization writing about a technique that worked for them, but we don't understand the why of that, right? Like, why were they using that technique? What was it about? Was it around, they were struggling to understand value, and so it was about creating transparency to value. But maybe we don't know that, and we just blindly kind of go forward with it, not realizing that maybe our struggle is slightly different. Maybe our struggle is about value, but it's, a different flavor of their struggle, and maybe a different technique would work for us. So, I do think that it's something that you don't want to just like say, hey, we're going to do this. Everybody just like go online and try to learn Scrum. I don't see that working very often. And I think we have to be honest about like, what are our constraints going to be? So even if a team is kind of doing like self-study to learn Scrum and they're committed to doing it, it's, look around you and it's like, what are the immediate impediments you see? And a lot of times, we're going to see some. And so it's always a degree of, if you literally are looking at this, like, I see, like, this is so overwhelming, I don't know how we're going to get there. You need to get more support, right? Like you might need to enroll more people in the leadership team. You might need to hire an experienced Scrum Master, right? Like a Scrum Master is meant to be a master of Scrum. And so if we don't have any support, in terms of somebody who already has Scrum experience and who is going to be able to leverage, skills around teaching, facilitation, coaching, and general leadership, bringing that leadership to the Scrum team, we are going to struggle. And so I've seen Scrum teams overcome that. But what I also see is when the organization already kind of struggles with a lot of very predictive, plan-driven ways of working that are going to kind of immediately become roadblocks for the Scrum team, we have to invest more in getting that Scrum team set up for success.
Okay, I feel pretty convinced by now. So if I would sum up what you were saying, as long as an organization is capable of switching the mindset and altering the way it operates, and there are skilled people that are able to train others and provide necessary leadership, the company is well capable of handling the fixed bid projects, leveraging the value behind Scrum framework. Would that be a correct statement?
It's one of those, like, it depends, right? Because like none of those are like a checkbox, right? None of those are a formula that you could be like, yes, they're ready. And as far as like relating this to the concept of like we're going to use Scrum to do projects, like we're literally bidding on work and we're going to use Scrum for the first time, I would not highly recommend that. Like if you are selling your ability to do that and you don't have experience doing it and and don't have success doing that, that shouldn't be something you're selling your capability on. Like I will kind of say that. I certainly wouldn't hire anyone that didn't have proven success of delivering with Scrum. And I would hope that that would come out in a conversation. It would be very obvious that, oh yeah, we're doing this for the first time. Okay, well then I'm not I'm not entering into it this way. So, it's kind of a, chicken or the egg scenario. There's a lot of it depends in it. And I just think I think organizations need to be honest with themselves and just like have conversations to talk about, what this means for us. We don't have to have everything figured out. Like we don't want people to kind of come at it thinking they have to know everything either. There's going to be challenges, but we move through them, right? We want to leverage Scrum in an iterative and incremental way, that we don't want to say, oh, plan everything out perfectly with your Scrum implementation. that would kind of be the opposite as well. But it's really about, have we had those conversations? And then do we have a mechanism that's going to enable us to keep having those conversations as we move forward and talk about, what challenges are we running into, that sort of thing. So, I mean, when it comes to the contract side of things, I think there's just so many variables with that. That, I think there's so much it depends there. It's hard to provide advice other than don't sell something you can't do. Right.
Yeah,
Don't be open and honest, right? Be transparent.
yeah, very true. And maybe one thing to just add on top before we move to the next one is that probably some people in the companies that do fixed bid feel that success is determined by getting paid, and they are getting paid if they complete everything on time, but they are missing out on the opportunity of actually delivering what their customer wants and really needs, so that they can grow together with the customer, because they are just ripping off quick rewards, and then they are missing out on some bigger opportunities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like not thinking about extracting money from the client today, but thinking about growing a valuable client relationship for the future. If you've worked in the consulting world, you've probably either done something that you didn't feel great about, or you were burned by a company who promised certain things and,
didn't
deliver.
Yeah.
Right. And it was mostly probably because we didn't have the real conversation we needed to have around the risk of product development, the fact that we can't control all the variables, and that, how about we just keep an open and honest conversation, a dialogue between us, so that we can respond to new information and respond to change. That's a way to talk about it without even talking about Scrum. Like I think Scrum is a mechanism that certainly helps create the transparency we need and the inspect and adapt feedback loops we need, right? Like it helps us manage risk, and it gives us, kind of an easy to understand way of doing that. But the reality is you could do everything I just said and not be using Scrum. Like it's the whole, like, be open and honest, and let's talk about these things, and let's be open to new information and changing direction. Scrum just gives us a mechanism to more clearly and distinctly manage that investment risk.
Okay, so consider this one busted then. The next one is that the product owner in Scrum is just a middleman, the translator between business and technology, who just passes down what needs to be done to the team and is responsible for explaining them what business actually wants and needs. Is this really true, or is there more to product owner role?
Yeah, there's absolutely more to the product owner role. This is a common kind of myth or anti-pattern that pops up. And a lot of times it comes from, we tend to work in silos in at least my experience, in, kind of the corporate world, is that like we tend to work in silos, kind of hand things off to other people. And we really, really, really want to be in control. And so we want somebody to, tell us exactly what to do and exactly how to like be successful and, get like a star, I don't know, on the report card, whatever it may be. And the reality is that doesn't work for complex work. And so, with Scrum, and one of the things that at first I have to admit, I was kind of like, whoa, what's happening here? But one of the changes in the 2020 Scrum Guide is this idea of having a team accountability. So this is where I start. And this has actually always been true. It wasn't stated directly in the Scrum Guide, but it's how we've always taught this, is that, like we have to work together as a team. We succeed as a team and we fail as a team. And so we traditionally had these three separate accountabilities of the product owner, the developers, and the Scrum Master. And there are still three distinct accountabilities for each of those roles. However, it is now clearly stated in the Scrum Guide that the entire Scrum team is accountable for creating a usable, valuable increment. And I would argue that that has always been the intention, right? But because there were so many of these misunderstandings and anti-patterns out there, in terms of how people were interpreting, oh, product owner, just value. That means just they write stuff in a product backlog and hand it off, right? And it's like, nah, not really. Could you do that? I guess, but you're probably not going to be super successful. And so, that I would say one of the reasons for the Scrum Guide update, every time they update it, it's very intentional, and it's not usually changing Scrum. It's more about helping people leverage Scrum in a more professional way, in a more effective way. And this is one of those changes. And so, yeah, the product owner's accountability is bigger. It's maximizing value. And in my experience, maximizing value doesn't happen when we're just treating the product owner as a translator or a go-between between stakeholders and the developers. And so there's a whole bunch of myths even wrapped up in this one. Developers are allowed to talk to stakeholders. They are allowed to collaborate directly, with users and customers. The product owner, I've borrowed in the past, my co-author, Simon Reindl, I've borrowed something I saw him teach once, is around thinking of the product owner as sort of like a lens, like helping provide a lens through which, the stakeholders have a better understanding of like what's possible with the product. The developers have a better understanding of like what the stakeholders need, but it's not like a translator relationship. It's not a handoff. It's this kind of lens that helps create perspective, but also focus, and try to like create more focus around value while also kind of broadening our understanding. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And from personal experience as the product manager, what comes to my mind is that the product owner is the sole person who knows most about the product, because it's his bloody or her bloody job, and has the most insights and is capable of reaching out both to market, to stakeholders, to developers, understands it the best. So it's just naturally the best person to make a decision, and in the end of the day being kept accountable. But people are having problems entrusting the person with decisions, because it feels like you are giving up from authority or whatever, or that the stakeholders are only one capable of directing the product, which is very often not true, because they don't have as much time to work with the product.
Yeah, there's the time factor. There's also the stakeholders likely have other job responsibilities, right? Like they have their own focus areas. And so, and they also bring different perspectives, right? Like they're there to advocate on behalf of whatever their stake is in the product, right? Like that's kind of what the word stakeholder means. And so you have to have somebody who's going to be able to kind of take it all in and taken these competing needs, like often they are competing needs, especially in terms of like, what do we do next? What do we do later? Where do we spend our money now? Somebody has to kind of be able to take I was almost going to say neutral, but it's not a neutral perspective, a value-driven perspective on taking all of this in, and then somebody who's going to be willing to make a tough decision and then get information and make a new decision, and then get information and make a new decision. The stakeholders bring really important conversation and information and data and insights into that conversation. But if you want to throw your stakeholders in a room and just say like, fight it out, that's a lot of waste. And it doesn't always lead to the best decisions. So by having one person who is truly accountable for the value of the product, it's so important.
Busted. Yeah. Next one is that the Scrum Master is responsible for resolving all the impediments that Scrum team may have. Is that really so?
So I'll say it depends on how you interpret the word impediment. So the way I tend to say this is to kind of help really clarify it is I say they help resolve the impediments that the Scrum team cannot resolve themselves. And so I look at impediments as, anything that is blocking, but not just blocking, like slowing down or, adding a friction to the ability to deliver value, and the speed at which we're able to deliver value. So so when we look at that perspective of impediments, the most important thing that comes out of this myth is Scrum Masters have to be careful about remembering their accountability is very it's around the effective use of Scrum and being accountable for the overall effectiveness of the Scrum team, but how you do that matters. And so, if we undermine self-management of the team and, for the means to the end, then the question is, are we actually enabling the Scrum team to be effective, right? Because like that's the short-term gain that can potentially do harm for the future ability of the Scrum team to truly be like a collaborative, self-managing, cross-functional team. And so this is one that, Scrum Masters, they have to really like question their own, judgment, their own decision-making around, is this something that like, I don't think my team can handle because I'm afraid of failure, like I don't want it to come back on me, because it does come back on me. If the team isn't successful, I'm not successful. And I have to be okay with that. And I also have to be looking at the broader perspective and the long game here. And so this is a really challenging thing. And it's one of the reasons, Scrum Masters this is a role you want people to have solid experience in. And, there's a lot of different skills that come into play when it comes to being a Scrum Master. And this is why organizations need to invest in, the professional development of everybody in their Scrum team and actually take this role seriously. It's another reason, another way I've seen this is, having somebody who is also a coach, maybe from the outside or maybe internally, that is also supporting the Scrum Master in growing their Scrum Master skills and their ability to discern, is this something I need to intervene, or I need to take a little bit more heavy touch and guiding, or is this an opportunity for me to show the team that I trust them and their ability to figure this out. And then this may also mean providing protection for the Scrum team, right? While they are trying to figure some things out. So, there's so much wrapped up in this question that it's hard to kind of, give a Scrum Master, like, here's your checklist of how you do your job today. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It's a lot about like being very super aware, observing what is happening, what's happening with the individuals, what's happening with kind of the whole team level, what's happening around them in the organization. Where are we in terms of the product life cycle? Where are we in terms of like the growth of the team identity and how well we collaborate? there's so much that goes into it, and we have to use all of this information to discern, how do I show up right now in this moment as a Scrum Master?
So if I got you right, there is no rule of thumb for where you draw the line as this is something I have to get involved in and this is something I have to let my team handle. It all depends, and there are many factors.
Yeah, this is a very big it depends one. And it's something that, as a Scrum Master, you learn it. Like, you learn it on the ground. You learn it through oftentimes failing. And I highly encourage Scrum Masters, especially, and I would say like early in your careers, but honestly, all the time, like having a support system, having other Scrum Masters that you talk to, having mentors that you take some of these challenges to, and also doing your own personal leadership work. Because a lot of this comes down to like understanding myself and like, what are my motivations here? Am I uncomfortable? Is that why I want to intervene? Am I in this like kind of mindset around like, I think this is the best practice and we should do it, and then I'm like, wait a second, there's no best practices in Scrum. Why do I think that? Right? Like, so that's what I mean by like your personal leadership skills, is really understanding yourself better and being able to reflect, and then kind of take that perspective of, okay, well, what feels like it's important now, and what am I going to do? And then also recognizing that nothing's final. Like, I may make a choice to take a step back and not intervene, and then something new comes up, right? Like, we see what happens, and then I'm like, okay, maybe this wasn't a great choice. Now I'm going to take a little bit more of, a direct role in helping resolve this. And then the last piece I'll say on this is, I have rarely intervened to resolve impediments on my own. So even when we are, as a Scrum Master, taking on this impediment to resolve, it's usually with input from the people most impacted, right? It's creating, it's still creating a conversation, and rarely is it just me off on my own, running off and fixing an impediment.
Yep, completely agree. So one quick yes or no question before we move to the next myth. Would you say that in a hypothetical situation where you are, as a Scrum Master, working with two different teams with the same product, because of team's maturity or some other conditions, in the very exact typical problem situation, you'll be taking two different decisions as a Scrum Master in different teams?
Yeah.
And that is fine.
It's there's no playbook, there's no rule book. I think at any point, if the thing I've had to most learn is that I know less than I think I do. And the moment I start thinking like, I got this, I know this stuff, it's like, but wait a second, am I not being open and curious anymore? Like, where have I started to think like, oh, this is the best practice? And it's like, not really.
Okay, the next one is that a Scrum team is allowed to release an increment only once in the end of the sprint. Is that indeed true, or you can do it more frequently?
Yeah, this is one of those things it's not true, but I still encounter it, that this belief that like the sprint end is like the point you're allowed to release. And like, no way. Like, if you can be delivering to production all along throughout a sprint, you can deliver to production, as many times as you want. It's not a barrier to this end of the sprint, isn't a barrier to release. It's not a gate of approval or denial of releasing. Like, all of that is left for the Scrum team to figure out how they handle it, right? Release management is not prescribed in the Scrum guide. I would say it's super cool if you have already released to production. Now you have data, you have feedback, you have information that you can then bring into your sprint review. That's going to actually create that conversation with additional transparency. That's going to help then that collaborative conversation. That's going to give us the feedback we need around, okay, well, how do we adapt our product backlog, as we're moving into the next sprint. So I think there's a lot of benefits of continuous delivery is a term you'll hear around that. And those are completely compatible concepts. In fact, I would argue it's sort of like not that it's for everyone, it all depends, what works for you, but like I would say continuous delivery is sort of like the dream of, technical excellence and the ability to like really get small pieces of value out the door, get really fast feedback, and be able to have even more information when you're discussing with your Scrum team and your stakeholders at the end of the sprint in the sprint review.
Yeah, sounds about right. One thing I would throw on top of it is that somewhere, and I can't recall where I read this, that sprints are rather planning and feedback loop cadence, not release cadence. So it doesn't count like that. And I've read somewhere this year a story about Netflix, one of the Netflix teams that's working with Scrum and making a release every 17 seconds on average. So that is either a very short sprint or a very, very, very fast feedback loop that they have enabled. Let's hope it's the second one.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Scrum is giving you the minimal inspect and adapt feedback loops, right? I've also encountered the question where teams are doing continuous delivery where they're like, well, then why do we even need the sprint review? This is already in production. People have seen it. And it's like, yeah, but like, this is when you get all of your stakeholders together and you all get on the same page and you're all looking at, okay, what has happened in this past sprint, right? What have we learned about the increment? And then based on kind of what's changed our environment and what's coming, right? It's like, there's still value in having that conversation on a cadence. Just because something's in production and certain stakeholders have seen it and you've sent out an email about, the data or something, that's different than that's not the same thing as what you actually gain from having your stakeholders in a room with the Scrum team, short time box, right? Get on the same page, inspect and adapt. That information carries you into planning your next sprint.
So one more kind of, we have touched it, but there is a myth that Scrum is very heavy on various meetings. So there is like a retrospective and review and daily Scrum every day, and there is planning, there are refinements, which are usually a meeting. Is it really too much? Is it just meetings and doing nothing, or there is more to that?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't call them meetings because the word meeting might mean something to different people. And so, I do tend to reiterate the language of the Scrum Guide. These are events. And what's different about that, right? We have a very clear purpose and we have a time box, and, we know who is supposed to attend. And so, with the events, this is interesting. I actually worked with somebody who had literally that same question. His team kept asking him like, wow, we have all these meetings, like Scrum is so meeting heavy. And he looked at them and he said, okay, we're going to do the math right now. So so if you're doing, let's say a 2-week sprint, actually write up on a whiteboard, how many minutes are we actually spending in an event? And if we were to use our maximum time box, and of course we can end early if we've achieved the purpose early. But if you actually do that math, and I'm not going to do it for you and for your listeners, because I would really like your listeners to do it themselves, and actually then look at, okay, what's the percentage of time that we would maximum spend in these Scrum events in the context of all the working hours possible? It's a pretty low number. It's lower than you probably think. And then the other piece of this is, if we're using our events well, what it does is it helps eliminate the need for other meetings. Now, the challenge is if like you're not utilizing your events well, and like maybe decisions aren't being made, or like the decision's made, but like certain people aren't on board, and then we have other meetings to like keep discussing it, right? And so the time boxes of Scrum and the clear purpose of the events is designed to actually eliminate waste and prevent the need for a whole bunch more meetings. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to need other discussions and working sessions, right? Product backlog refinement is not prescribed by Scrum, and Scrum teams will decide themselves. But I always look at it as, if this feels unproductive, then have a conversation in the sprint retrospective. about why we don't feel like our events are a good use of our time, and or why we have these other sessions, right? Whether they're meetings, working sessions, whatever. And so I think that's actually a really great reason to bring it into the sprint retrospective if we're feeling that way.
So if we are utilizing the events and playing by the rules, then we're actually saving time, what you're saying, right?
In my experience, definitely. Before I discovered Scrum, my calendar was like back-to-back meetings, and I felt like nothing could get done. And that's an extreme example as well. But we have to find what works for us, and if we're using it well, the intention is that it eliminates the need and forces us to make quick decisions, and also not try to over plan, right? Or plan too far into the future, which I think is a tendency and why we kind of have extra meetings thrown in.
Yeah, you've convinced me. Busted.
All right.
The scope of the sprint can't change during the sprint.
Yeah.
Because we've committed to delivering the scope, and then we have to deliver everything, all the backlog items that we have.
So what we're committing to in the sprint is to creating a useful, valuable increment that meets the sprint goal. So the sprint goal does not change. However, the actual scope, the specific product backlog items that we are working on and completing in order to achieve the goal and have a done increment, those can change. This is that idea of we're still dealing with complexity and unpredictability, even at the time horizon of a sprint. And so the sprint goal gives us the focus we need, while allowing the flexibility for the sprint backlog, right? Which are maybe different product backlog items can change. So if we run into an issue, the sprint goal helps us focus on, okay, we're clearly not going to be able to do all this stuff we thought we could do. How do we get to a done increment? That's always the first question I ask, right? Like what scope can get to done in terms of meeting our definition of done? And then two is, and then can we still meet the sprint goal? Maybe we do it in a different way, but can we still meet the sprint goal? So those are really the two questions that matter. The scope of a sprint is not fixed, but the sprint goal is.
And as long as those are the two questions in the back of the heads of developers during each daily scrum, then they probably have a higher chance of succeeding in the end of the day.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much for a very quick paced conversation. That was quite a delight. Let me know if what you have on your radar, as you are quite a busy lady, and I know that you always are planning for something, and there are some fancy events or trainings coming up, or you're speaking somewhere in the conference. So what you've been up to? Where can we see or listen to you or read something of yours?
Well, my website, agilesocks.com, is really the central point of everything. You can sign up for my newsletter there. It's about monthly-ish, and it's kind of like my musings, my tips, and then kind of what is going on, what content I've created. My audience, my community finds out first. So that's the first thing I would suggest if people want to stay in touch and know what I'm up to. And then also on my website, you can find my online courses. So over the past few years, I've created a couple of self-guided online courses, video-based with workbooks that are really geared towards Scrum Masters. And I would say anybody who considers themselves a servant leader and working in the context of agility and Scrum teams, that are really about kind of beyond Scrum itself, like kind of growing some of these other skills that people need. So I have Scrum Master Grow, which is a lightweight course around taking 6 weeks around focusing on thinking about how are you showing up, right? In terms of the personal leadership type of skills. So how are you showing up open and intentional as you go about your day? And then the Coaching Skills for Impact is my kind of more robust online course that is really about the coaching skills that Scrum Masters need to be successful. So not all of us want to go out and invest or have a need to invest in like professional coaching, but we do need coaching skills. And so this is my way to make kind of those things more accessible and also put them in the context of Scrum and agility to help Scrum Masters leverage coaching skills more effectively. So those are two online courses you can get at any point, find information on my website. And then one of my new big things, other than hosting, professional Scrum training, the other way to work directly with me is through my leadership program. So I launched Scrum Master Evolution to like really deepen the leadership skills. And so it is for advancing Scrum Masters who are looking at how do I bring this more, this idea around like wholeness and interconnectedness and integration into how I'm showing up as a leader in terms of working with my Scrum team, working in my organization. And so it's really bringing in more of the leadership concepts and then really deepening, I think that there's a lot that we don't see in terms of how we can leverage transparency in broader and deeper ways. How are we really leveraging, what we teach our teams in terms of the Agile values and the Agile principles, right? I think there are many more levels deeper we can go. And so I wanted to create an experience of servant leadership that takes us a little deeper than what we tend to see available to us in the training world.
So are those both of these programs actually available via remote?
Yeah, so the online courses are completely self-guided online. So you can do that in your own convenience on your own time. The Scrum Master Evolution is more of it's a group cohort. And so when I open up the next cohort, we will see who's interested, and that will determine the time zone it's gonna, the time zones that are gonna it's gonna work for. So because that one is very it's live, it is something that it's going to we use Zoom. It's, accessible if you have a Wi-Fi connection. The tricky part about that is accommodating different parts of the world. But I've had people reach out from Australia, and I was like, hey, if we have enough Australians, then maybe I'll be the one working at a weird time. I'm very open to that. So yeah, like it'll be interesting to see how Scrum Master Evolution evolves.
Yeah, fingers crossed it all works out.